Okay, maybe the start of the video we should be like, hi guys, so the best cards ever are, and we just list off the joke cards.
And then it's done.
Cultivate, Crick, Herald of Leshak,
Azorius Locket.
Because
white and blue are the best two colors.
The bounce tap lands.
Just the Boros one.
Yeah. And then stop for 10 seconds, and then just restart.
Hey guys, welcome to the Command Valley podcast. My name is Landon, and today I'm here with Griffin, and we have a very special topic to talk about with you guys. We're going to be going over some issues that we felt the Command Valley podcast are big obstacles for people across the entire spectrum of like the experience spectrum in EDH, whether you're a new player or an old player. Building a deck can be very daunting. Absolutely. We're going to talk about the challenges, the struggles of building a deck or altering a deck that, like a pre-constructed deck that you bought or somebody gave to you. We're just going to be going over how you can make your deck just a little stronger or perform better. And we'd also like to say that there really is no right or wrong way to build a deck, but there are definitely ways of improving your deck.
Cool. All right, let's go into the first topic about where to start. For new players, the most daunting part of Commander is, well, how do I start? And one of the best places is to start with a precon. But if you don't want to start with a precon, you want an actual legendary creature or an archetype to go off of, this is how we're going to do it.
So just to go over what a pre-constructed deck is, Wizards of the Coast in the past, every year in August, they will release 4 to 5 out-of-the-box, ready-to-play commander decks that have a face commander and 2 other commanders that you can just swap in, and it's 100 cards ready to go. You don't have to alter it whatsoever. You don't even have to play with sleeves. You can just, out of the box, it's ready to go. But those decks also have a lot of room for improvement, and sometimes it's kind of hard to know, especially if you're a new player. I know that I face this, okay, what cards are good in this deck and are in these colors, and work with this strategy, especially when you don't really know a whole lot of cards and you haven't played a whole bunch of Magic or you haven't played a whole bunch of Commander. It's kind of hard to know what's going to be good. So we're just going to go over that. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go through 6 easy steps that somebody that is new to Commander can follow to build their deck and follow up on whatever theme that they want to build. So the very first step is you need to pick a legendary creature or pick an archetype of some sort. Maybe you really like merfolk, you like elves, you like dinosaurs. You have this idea in your mind that you want to build. And then you go from there, right? You start at that point.
Another good place to start is where I started in Commander, which was the deck archetypes, which I like to call the deck personalities. The 4 deck archetypes / personalities are control, combo, aggro, and mid-range. And we can kind of go into details about what it means to be one of these decks, but it's essentially personality types that you can latch onto as a new player to begin building your deck.
One thing that I wanted to mention is at the end of the day, you can do basically whatever you want with your deck. It's your deck. There's not policemen enforcing, oh, you're playing a control deck, but you're not playing X cards. That's not really what Commander's about. It's all about self-expression. You're expressing yourself through your card choices, through your play style, and we're just giving you these criteria and these things as a place to go from to help you build your deck, to give you a vision to build a more optimized deck. And we'll talk about what an optimized deck is when we start going through our 6 steps. So once you've picked your legendary creature, or you've picked your strategy, or you've picked the theme that you want to follow, next you need to just identify what the strategy is, right? Are you going to, and that kind of goes back to the control, the aggro, the combo, and the mid-range. That will kind of dictate what your strategy is. For example, control, you're going to be playing fewer creatures. You're going to be prioritizing more interaction and more control spells as counter spells. Maybe you're going to be stealing things. Or if you're going to go for more mid-range, you're going to be prioritizing more bomb, thready creatures that scream, remove me or I'm going to win, or more grindy or value engines. And if you're going for aggro, you're going to be playing more low-costed, efficient creatures that aim at doing as much damage as possible for the least amount of mana input. Next, you're going to be looking at combo if you want to win really fast out of nowhere, oftentimes setting up some weird interaction between cards that maybe, weren't supposed to be interacting with each other, but because Commander is a beautiful spot where cards that never meant to be interacted with each other suddenly interact with each other, combo is really cool. So once you've picked that and you've picked your strategy, you then need to decide how you're going to accomplish your strategy, right? You need to understand, how am I going to get from turn 1 to turn 10 and win the game, right? How am I going to make my deck get to do what it wants to do. Griffin, what are some ways, like what are some important things to get your deck to where it needs to go?
So if we think about the deck theme, and we've picked a deck theme, we need to know what we're going to put into the deck to make sure that we can attain that goal. And there's different things that we're going to go on the list about, and make sure you're including like ramp spells, which means getting to there as efficiently as possible. Mana acceleration, right?
Basically
your soul rings and things like that. Things like card draw, which give you more cards to get to that strategy. Things that interact with other people to stop them from their strategies. All these things are going to be able to help you attain the end goal of your deck.
The beautiful thing about Commander and the beautiful thing about Magic is each color has their own ways of getting mana acceleration and their own ways of getting card draw. And it's kind of like a puzzle figuring out how are you going to get access to those resources in the colors that you've chosen. So after you've picked your legendary creature, you've found out the strategy, you figured out how your deck is going to win, and you've selected all the cards that are going to help you get there. You need to then put cards in your deck that are going to protect your strategy, protect your commander if you rely heavily on your commander, or if you've picked an aggro deck and you really need to keep your creatures on the board, you need to find ways of protecting your board. Or if you're a combo deck and you need to protect your combo or else you're not going to win the game. And control is you're in a perpetual state of protection. You're protecting your board and yourself at all costs. So, and like we said earlier, we're going to go through examples. Griffin and I both are going to choose a legendary creature. We're going to kind of go through these steps. We're just going over the steps right now.
If it doesn't make sense right now, that's okay. It's kind of a little bit vague, but once we pick our creatures and go through them with you guys, it'll make a lot more sense.
After you have put and dedicated card slots in your deck to protecting your strategy, you need interaction. In fact, interaction is super important. And when I say interaction, I mean spells, creatures, ways of dealing with what your opponents are doing and how to stop them from reaching their strategy.
Right. One of the biggest complaints I've heard from new players is I've built this deck and I really want to play it, but every time I try to do my strategy, I get stopped and I have no way of stopping other people. Commander is a very fluid story over the course of the game where somebody leads and then gets knocked down and somebody else takes the lead and gets knocked down. You want to make sure that you are able to lead and also be able to knock down somebody else who's also leading.
So you need to play a part in the story. Like how are you stopping, the combo player from comboing off on like turn 5, right? So and a cool thing to look at in Commander is it's not 1-on-1, right? It's 4-on-4. It's 1-on-1-on-1. Like you are not the only one that has to deal with threats on the board. And you can kind of, and we'll make a video on politicking, but you can kind of leverage your position and team up with other people and kind of use other people to get what you want. And that like I said, we could make a whole video talking about politics. But all this to say that interaction and spells to interact with your opponents are super important in your deck. And so we've kind of gone through basically all the different types of cards you're going to want to have in your deck on like without actually mentioning any specific cards, just the ideas that you need to have when you're selecting cards. But another really important part of deck building is the reflection period that you have after you finish a game. Because after you finish a game, you're going to think about, maybe this card that I drew basically sat in my hand the entire game and wasn't relevant, or I didn't draw enough lands, or I drew too many lands, or I played all of my spells from my hand and all of a sudden I didn't have a way of getting more cards into my hand, or my opponent played a card type like a planeswalker and I wasn't able to deal with it, or they played an enchantment that I wasn't able to remove and that really destroyed my strategy. These are all questions that you ask yourself after the game, and you can reevaluate your deck and you can decide, was it just a bad matchup? Did I just keep a really sketchy hand? Or do I really need to look at and evaluate the strategy of my deck and the cards that I've put in my deck?
I think this reason is one of the most important in all deck building, because the thing is, deck building is not just you build a deck once. Deck building is you're building a deck maybe 10 times, but you're just changing it every time you play.
Definitely.
So reflecting on the deck after you've played it and being able to know, how can I make this better? What didn't work? What did work? And how can I change it to make it better is going to be your best technique to deck tech.
And it all comes down to the fact of, what are you trying to accomplish with your deck? I have pet decks that I don't expect them to win, and I know that they're not super great, but I have a really fun time playing it. And I think that at the end of the day, that's the most important part. Are you playing this deck because you want to win every single match? Are you playing this deck because you want to have a really fun, exciting game of Commander, whether you win or lose? You just want to have fun with your friends. And that, again, comes back to when you pick, your legendary creature, you pick your strategy, you can kind of decide, okay, how strong do I want to make this deck? And sometimes you're going to reevaluate that question after you've built the deck. Sometimes you will build a deck that you're not sure about, and then you see, whoa, this is actually really powerful. I could turn this into something really strong. And that's just one of the beautiful things about Commander is decks are ever changing.
Definitely. I think a good example is that I've in the past I've built a Mariki Beret deck that obviously the goal of all Commander decks is to win. But with this deck, there are very few times that I win with Mariki, but the times where I was just able to steal people's creatures multiple times per turn and control the board in that way, even though Mariki gets removed and I get killed first, that was my victory. I did the thing that I wanted to do with the card that I built the deck around. And if that is your victory, then you've won that game, right? At the end of the day, the goal is to have a good time with the players that you're playing with and enjoy the deck that your personality is put into.
That's why we're not here today to tell you you have to do these things, you have to build your deck a certain way. We're here to help people that are maybe having a hard time building a Commander deck, they don't know where to start. We're going to give them, or we're going to give you, the pointers and the advice that you need to get your deck off the ground and to just perform at a basic level. Because I think that is something that every deck needs. Your deck has to be able to perform, right? You have to be able to draw cards in your deck. You have to be able to interact with your opponent. And these guidelines are just basic ways of just making your deck perform better. So now let's go through these steps again, but with a strategy in mind already. Let's just choose one. And let's see what it actually looks like when we plug a deck into the formula.
So what we're going to do is the two ways of starting to build a deck, or not necessarily the two ways of building a deck, but the two good places to start is to either find a legendary creature from either a standard set or that you've seen and start from there, or build it off of a theme. So for me, I'm just going to take one from Throne of Eldraine, the most recent set. Say I'm a new player and I've sat down and I open up my booster pack and I see at the end of the pack there's Torbran, Thane of Redfell. So Torbran is a 1 red for a 2/4 legendary creature dwarf noble that says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2. So you've seen Torbran at the end of your booster pack. You're like, wow, this seems really cool. I like the idea of red. I like the idea of doing damage. So this is going to be my commander. And now I have to pick 99 cards to go along with that.
He looks like Gimli.
He does look, it is Gimli. If you can't tell me otherwise.
So what strategy immediately sticks out from Torbran? Like what is so blatantly stapled onto his card? Like what strategy would that fall into if you just objectively look at that ability?
So obviously with Torbran, the idea is damage. With your strategy, you just want to deal as much damage as possible. Since Torbran deals 2 extra damage, that means all of your little spells that only deal maybe 2 or 3 damage now do even more, and all of your creatures are dealing more. So that is going to be the strategy of the deck, is to win by doing damage faster than another deck would.
So that's like the general strategy, right? Is you're going to want to put lots of aggressive stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So what the main problem with aggressive decks is they often run out of gas. Gas is a term that a lot of people in Magic the Gathering refer to as cards that do things, cards that draw you more cards, or just spells that you can play that impact the board. That is kind of gas. So that's the problem with aggressive decks, is often they run out of cards in hand because they play them out so fast and they get them all out on the battlefield. And that's kind of, the give and take, right? They do a lot of damage really fast, but they also run out. So making sure that you can get to the end goal of winning the game, going to our second step, is you're going to want to play a lot of cards that don't cost a whole lot of mana. So you're going to want to be playing like cheap creatures that can ping over, can get in for damage over time, and Torbran is going to make them do more damage. Would you say that that's something that you would look like when you're building the deck, is smaller
Absolutely.
Creatures? How else would you close out the game?
Right. So I've decided that Torbran is going to be the commander, and I've also decided that the strategy of the deck is to be doing damage faster than another deck could. So now that I've decided those two things, the next thing is to decide, how am I going to get there? And with Torbran, there's a couple of different ways that you can get there. The idea that I would pick, because red is primarily known for goblins, I would pick a goblin-themed deck that has a lot of small creatures that now do extra damage. There's a lot of ways of making more and doing really fast, very intense plays that now get even more intensified by the +2 damage from Torbran.
I would also look at cards in red that let you draw cards. Every color in Magic has ways of drawing cards. I laugh because some colors are better than others.
Some colors are better than others, definitely.
But red is known to not be super great at drawing cards. A lot of red spells that draw you cards require you to also discard a card first, or to discard cards. It'll let you draw multiple cards, but you have to discard some. But, you take what you can get in that color. So you would put in, as many ways of drawing cards as possible. Also, another thing that you should put in as many ramp spells as possible. Like red doesn't have a whole lot of cards that let you put lands into play, but you can play artifacts, right? Every commander strategy has access to colorless artifacts that tap for mana.
Right. So, for example, for Torbran, if I'm looking at card draw, things that I would choose are cards like Skull Clamp, Mind's Eye, and Magus of the Wheel. That are cards that can give
or like Tormenting Voice, Thrill of Possibility, Cathartic Reunion. All three of these cards that I just mentioned require you to draw cards and then discard cards.
But they're very efficient and low costed.
They're efficient, they're low costed, and that would kind of be my take on the deck too, is low cost. Like I don't want anything that costs more than 5 because you're trying to do as much as you can on one turn. And if you're limited on mana because red isn't super great at getting a lot of mana, you want to prioritize playing lots of spells on one turn rather than just tapping all of your mana for one thing that isn't very aggressive.
Absolutely. And then the next part is mana ramp. So you want to play, like Landon said, artifacts that give you mana. So things like Soul Ring, Thran Dynamo, Hedron Archive,
Wayfarer's Bauble. Just all cards that can help you get lands into play or just give you access to extra mana.
Right.
The next part is how do you protect Torbran, right? Or how do you protect your strategy? This kind of, and this step, sometimes you kind of have to look at the colors that you're in, right? There aren't a whole lot of ways in red that make it so you can defend your entire board. And that's why one of the cool things about Commander is you can pick a commander that has multiple colors. So sometimes one color will make up for the weakness in another color. But that doesn't mean monocolor decks are high and dry. Like I said, artifacts are available to all Commander decks. It would really suck if Torbran got killed as soon as you played him because now he's going to cost more mana, right? So it's better to play a spell that will protect Torbran. It's more mana efficient to play an artifact that can protect Torbran than having to recast him after he dies.
Right.
So there are things like Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, Darksteel Plate. These are all artifacts that are equipments, so they stay on the battlefield even if the creature that it's attached to gets killed. These are artifacts that give the creature that's equipped some type of evasion. Darksteel Plate gives them indestructible, Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves give the creatures hexproof and shroud, respectively. It's just ways of making your creatures harder to kill. And this will go a long way of helping you get closer to winning the game, if that's the strategy of the deck. And these are ways that will make your deck perform better.
Right. So Torbran's strategy is to win by dealing as much damage as possible through goblins, and the way to protect your strategy is by protecting Torbran. Now that's not going to be the case for every single commander deck, but because this is a red commander deck and we're relying
for this example,
relying
just
on
giving
Torbran
you some
so heavily.
Some concrete things of looking at. And I think, not every deck is going to want the same cards for protection, but I think that's probably good for the protection.
Definitely.
Next is interaction. Torbran gives you good interaction, right? He gives you ways of dealing with your opponent's creatures, right? So his clause that says, if a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent opponent controls, it deals 2 more damage, right? So that means all of your goblins that have power and toughness 1/1 now do 3 damage to your opponent's blocking creatures. Now that makes your opponents have to think again about blocking your creatures, and that will kind of stop them from stopping you, if that makes sense. It'll make it so your damage will get through easier because maybe they don't want to lose their creatures.
Right.
It also makes because red has a lot of burn spells, right? It has a lot of spells that have pay X mana and then it does that much damage, whatever you put into X, or it has like lightning bolt effects or lightning strike effects. Torbran makes those spells a little bit more powerful that you can maybe take down a bigger creature that you couldn't take down before without him.
Right. For example, if we have Torbran and we're really not drawing very many goblins and people are putting out so many creatures, one of the ways to be able to interact is by playing something like an Earthquake. For red X, you can deal X damage to each creature, and if you pay 3, you'll do 3 damage to Torbran, but 6 damage to everything else. Single spot removals, even something like a lightning bolt that now deals 5 damage to any target. These things are considered interaction because you can use them to remove people's key pieces and people's creatures that are halting you or making them lead the game.
Definitely. Well said. Moving on to the reflection period. Just to give you like a real world, not a real world example, but like an idea is maybe you played your Torbran deck and at the table there was a control deck and another aggro deck and another mid-range deck, and you found that you were just having a really hard time breaking through the control player's defenses. Or maybe the mid-range player had way too many creatures and you were not aggressive enough, and maybe the other aggressive deck was more aggressive than your deck.
Right. Maybe you didn't draw enough cards. Maybe you didn't ramp enough. Maybe the decisions that you made weren't the best. And you're reflecting on your deck, deciding, what should I take out? What should I put in? How could I have played this better?
Or sometimes maybe I just want to scrap the deck completely.
Yeah, which happens.
And I think before you get to that point, I think you really need to evaluate the meta, right? You really need to, and meta is just defined by the people that you play with and the decks that are in your play group. And you need to just realize, was it just a bad matchup? Or maybe the control player kept a really controlly hand because they knew that they were playing against an aggressive player and they kept a hand that was not favorable for yours. And I think I probably have preemptively scrapped decks that I didn't need to scrap. That I just had a really bad game and I felt really bad about losing, but I had to maybe just realize that I was playing against, it was just a bad matchup. And I think if you realize that it was just a bad matchup, or you realize you kept a risky hand and it did not pay off, then you can just go forward. And that doesn't have anything to do with the deck, right? You don't need to change the deck. You just need to keep playing it. And once you've played it in a variety of different metas and you have played against a lot of different things and you decide, okay, it is just not performing. I'm not drawing enough lands. I don't have enough interaction. And you start to see the pitfalls of the deck, not the meta. Then you can be like, okay, maybe there's a more powerful creature that can lead the strategy. Maybe I need to put different cards. Maybe I need to reduce my mana curve because I have way too many high-costed spells in my deck and I never get to cast them because I'm dead before I get enough mana. I mean, these are a lot of things to think about. Are these kind of things that you think about too?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about building a Torbran deck now. I got all excited.
Yeah, I just crushed it.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Let's go ahead and just go through the 6 steps again really quickly with Torbran and just see how we ended up. So the first thing, we picked a legendary creature. We opened Torbran in our booster pack. We were like, yeah, this legendary creature looks really cool. The second thing is, well, what's the strategy? What are we doing with Torbran? Again, we're just dealing as much damage as fast as possible with Torbran's damage
to permanents and our opponents.
Right. And then how do you get there? In my example, I said I wanted to do goblins, so I'll go on to EDH Rec or Scryfall or Wizards
Gatherer.
Yeah, Gatherer, and just type in goblins and see what goblins are cool and throw them in there. And after that, we have to decide how are we going to protect our strategy. Lena's examples were artifacts that protected Torbran in some form or another so that we can continue to use his ability. Step 5 is our interaction. How are we going to deal with other people's things? And we have lots of single spot removals, damage type effects against creatures that we can use to get rid of other people's strategies and creatures. And then the final step is to self-reflect after we've played Torbran. We're like, okay, we didn't draw enough cards, we didn't ramp enough, I didn't have enough creatures, my creatures were too high costed. So after we've reflected on the deck and we've made our improvements, now we've officially gone through a deck build.
And then you need to play the deck.
Yeah, well, of course, like obviously the reflection happens after you've played the deck and you love it, you want to keep playing it. Again, as I said before, decks will go through multiple stages and changes, and maybe it switches from goblins to just spells and just damage spells. And it will move again to something else. The important thing to remember is just these steps to be able to help you focus on how you're going to build it, instead of just going on to, for instance, how I started is just going on to Wizards Gatherer and just typing in a card that included this, like discard, and throwing it all together.
Definitely. And to kind of go through this process again, but with a different strategy, just to kind of give you an idea of what strategies outside of aggro look like. I recently built a deck that I love. Normally I play competitive EDH, so I have a really, not expensive, because that's not always indicative of a competitive deck, but I have a competitive deck that was meant to be played in a certain meta. And I really like that. I really enjoy competitive Magic, or competitive EDH. It's really fun. But that's not the only way to have fun with Magic, right? It's not always about winning.
Right.
And so one of the new legendary creatures that was printed in Throne of Eldraine in the Brawl decks, the Brawl pre-constructed decks that Wizards of the Coast made, was Korvold, Fakehurst King. He costs 2, a black, a red, and a green, so 5 mana total. For a legendary creature, Dragon Noble, he has flying, and whenever Korvold, Fakehurst King enters a battlefield, or whenever he attacks, you have to sacrifice another permanent. And whenever you sacrifice a permanent for whatever reason or from whatever source is making you sacrifice that permanent, you get to put a +1 counter on Korvold and draw a card for each of those permanents sacrificed. He's also a 4/4, which is a pretty good start. So there's a lot of text on him, right? And there's a lot of words, and it really feels like you could go anywhere with that. And I tend to like commanders like that have several different ways of building him. You could do an aggro Korvold deck. You could do a combo Korvold deck. I've seen those. But I chose to do a mid-range Korvold deck. So I chose to have maybe a little bit of a slower deck that prioritized drawing lots of cards and playing lots of creatures. So I started with focusing on sacrificing permanents and having lots of little tokens to sacrifice. So I put a lot of cards into the deck, like Awakening Zone, Avenger of Zendikar, Pawn of Ulamog. These are all cards that make tokens, right? That make little disposable things that I can sacrifice to Korvold or sacrifice to other things to draw cards. That strategy is actually pretty strong. I've had some good success with it, and it's just overall it's just really fun to play. And it's fairly easy. It's a fairly easy deck to build because these colors, red, green, and black, are very good at making tokens and making things to sacrifice. Another thing that really helps get the strategy going is I put in a lot of spells that let me put lands into play directly from my library. And that's just a really, really, really powerful effect, and green is probably the best at that. So there are cards like Cultivate, Secure a Tri-Builder, which Secure a Tri-Builder does double duty in Korvold because you can sacrifice itself to its own ability to go and search for a land and put it into play. So with Korvold out, not only am I getting a land, but I'm also getting to draw a card, and Korvold is getting bigger. On top of that, I've got ways of protecting not only myself, but Korvold too. One of my favorite cards in my Korvold deck that not only protects me, but it also protects my whole strategy and has actually served as a win con is a green card called Arachnogenesis. I actually found this card in my collection. I don't know how it got there. I was digging through my bulk and I found this card and I was like, holy crap, why am I not playing this in Korvold? It's 2 and a green for an instant. It says put X 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield where X is the number of creatures attacking you. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. So let's say somebody gets really greedy and they swing at you with your entire team, and then they're hitting you for 6 or 7 creatures. You cast Spider Spawning, you're going to make a whole bunch of spider tokens. You're going to make 7 spider tokens if they've got 7 creatures. You can block safely with those spider tokens. They're not going to get killed because all combat damage is going to be prevented by non-spiders. And then you've got 7 tokens that you can sacrifice to other things on your board to make Korvold bigger and draw that many cards. I mean, there are games where I cast that and basically that sealed the deal. I ended up winning just from the sheer value that Korvold offered me. For interaction, red, green, and black have really powerful effects for interacting. Green gives you a wide variety of ways of dealing with artifacts and enchantments. In fact, I think green can deal with artifacts and enchantments better than any other color can, which is super relevant in Commander. You're going to see a lot of artifacts and a lot of enchantments because people tend to think, oh, not a lot of people play artifacts and enchantment removal, so these are basically untouchable permanents. But in green, they're going to have to think twice because you can actually interact with those pretty easily. Green and black also has lots of kill spells like Death Sprout, Assassin's Trophy, Putrefy, Abrupt Decay. These are all green and black instants and sorceries that can deal with permanents or creatures that are really troublesome for you. One of my favorite cards for protecting my board is Heroic Intervention. It's 1 and a green instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So that is a perfect example. It basically can go in any green deck that protects your entire board all at once. From board wipes, target removal, anything your opponents can do to interact with you, basically a catch-all free-all spell. So once I first built the deck, and after I played with it for the first time, I had this huge... I realized that I was not playing enough lands. I was actually drawing enough lands because Korvold was letting me draw a whole bunch of cards. What I noticed was I actually ran out of lands to search for with my ramp spells. I ran out of basic lands. I was playing so many tap lands and bounce lands that all of a sudden I didn't have any targets for my Cultivates and Kodama's Reaches, and I actually ran out of cards to... And I counted the lands in my deck, and I was playing like 6 or 7 lands too little. And that was really, really, really difficult because it feels really bad switching out permanents, like flashy spells and big creatures for lands. It feels really bad. And I think I went through that. See, I went through this process to build Korvold different than this process. I started with all the spells I wanted to play, and then I went to the lands, right? And I think you should probably start with your lands and get those slots, like stored away or like selected already. That way you don't make the same mistake that I did of playing not enough lands because, like I said, it feels really bad cutting, big flashy things for lands. And I think that can just be prevented by, starting with getting your land base out of the way. Would you agree?
Absolutely. All right. So now that you've gone through it, let's go ahead and just go through the 6 steps and just briefly mention how you went through it. So number 1, where to start? How'd you start?
Picked up the Brawl deck. Thought Korvold was super sweet.
Cool.
Like the colors. I'd never built a commander deck on those colors before.
Cool. And what's the strategy?
Strategy is making lots of tokens, sacrificing those tokens to either artifacts or creatures that let me sacrifice things, put lots of counters on Korvold, draw lots of cards, swing with Korvold, win.
Cool. How do you get there?
I get there by playing ramp spells, by making sure I have enough tokens on the board to sacrifice, and usually that works out.
Cool. How are you going to protect that strategy?
Heroic Intervention is amazing. There are way more ways to protect your board than just Heroic Intervention, but protecting it with, filling it with enough creatures that I don't just die to being attacked randomly, and I protect my strategy by also interacting with my opponent.
Right,
by
so how do
removing
you
their
interact?
things. What was that?
How do you interact?
kill spells primarily with my deck. I mostly am just removing permanents off the battle. Like, it's not like a control deck where I'm countering spells before they hit the table. I can deal with them when they're on the table.
Cool. So after you've played the deck, you talked a little about reflection, but how did your deck go through changes?
So right now it's in its version 2, which is I play more lands. I had to cut interaction. I was playing a lot of interaction. I think I was playing like 15 kill spells, and I cut way back on that. Maybe I shouldn't have, but
Landon likes to remove things.
I do like to remove things. I like to feel like I have answers, but
I'm like 2 removal spells away from losing my crap. All right, so now that we've gone through those 6 steps, I would encourage you guys, think about your decks that you've made. Think about, where did you start? What's the strategy? How did you get there? How do you protect that strategy? How do you interact with other people's strategy? And how did you reflect? And for new players, go through these 6 steps. You don't have to go through them exactly in that order. You don't have to do them exactly in this way. This is just our recommendation from the Command Valley.
Just questions that you can ask yourself.
How we would recommend that you can build a deck in the way that makes the most sense. So go to your local game store, open up some packs, look at legendary creatures, start from that point, start from a strategy that you like, and go ahead and go through these 6 steps. I promise you these 6 steps will help you not feel so daunted by the task of building a commander deck. It will feel a lot more smooth. As far as ways to be able to see cards, we'll include links on the video about where to find them, like EDH Rec, Gatherer, Scryfall. Even just looking at the glass cases at your LGS, just looking at different cards and different creatures or strategies is a good place to go to.
Another thing to remember is new cards are coming out all the time. Wizards is always printing new sets at least every 3 months. It's actually feels like it's every month that we get a new set, honestly. And that's where content creators come in. We are here. We are always looking at we're always looking at new cards that are coming out, and we are going to be releasing content and reviews. We're going to be reviewing every set that comes out, and we're going to be telling you, hey, these cards are really good in these specific strategies, or this card is really going to help this color get more access to this. Like, we're going to be helping people and like find out and discover new cards as often as possible.
Absolutely. And obviously stay tuned for our deck techs that we are releasing every Monday. We don't go through these 6 steps because we have built commander decks so often that we kind of do this naturally, but go ahead and keep these 6 steps. And when you see the commander, think about how you would do it. How would you build the strategy? How would you interact? How would you protect? And just keep these steps in mind. And as you keep building commander decks, they'll just come naturally. And that's about it, guys. Thanks so much for listening to our 6 steps. I hope you guys got something out of it. I hope that commander decks and building commander decks seems a little less daunting.
And if you guys have any questions about maybe decks in particular that you already have built on ways to improve them, don't hesitate to either send us an email or comment in the comment section. Hey, how can I improve this deck, or what cards would you recommend? We're always here to answer those questions and always give you ways to improve.
Cool. And with that is all we have. So stay tuned for our deck techs and see you guys on the next late night drive.